Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. And it's Mock Draft Monday, the best day of the week, especially in the NBA playoffs when we get to every single Monday look at an NBA mock draft where, each and every week we do something different, a little bit fresh, a little bit fun with it. So hopefully you guys do enjoy the content here at Utility Sports. And just quickly, in this video, we're not doing a lottery simulation. We have in quite a few of the other ones, but no lottery simulation for this mock. But instead, we are going to do some trade discussions throughout the video. So I don't have any mocked trades, but we're going to talk about potential trade spots, trade destinations, teams that might look to move up, down throughout this mock draft, which I think is a lot of fun and a different way of looking at the mocks than we currently have up to this point on the channel, which I'm really excited for. And I'm also just really jazzed up. I got home from a NBA playoff game today, so I'm very, very stoked, very excited at the time I'm recording this. As you can tell, my voice is probably a little bit raspier than normal. It's kind of getting into it, hyping up the home team a little bit. So I'm in a really great mood. I hope you guys are looking forward to this mock. I know I am looking forward to recording it. So if you are, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more, and also turn that notification bell so you don't miss out on more Utility Sports content. And without further ado, again, with no lottery simulation, the Detroit Pistons sit atop the clock, first overall in this mock. And with this pick, it's the no-brainer, obvious selection that everyone's looking for in Victor Wembanyama. Every single team in the league wants to get this pick. And I think that's one reason why we don't need to simulate the lottery every single week, because it's pretty clear to me that first overall, Victor Wembanyama is the selection for any of the teams that are in the lottery race right now. So if you're looking and say, who would my team pick? Victor Wembanyama is the choice. Pretty clearly, concisely, first overall, he's the player. And for Detroit specifically, this is a really, really good get for them, because you look at their roster currently, Jalen Duren, I think, is the long-term center of the future. And I think he would alleviate some of the pressure day one on Victor Wembanyama on the defensive end of the court in terms of playing at the level of the screen, utilizing drop coverage sometimes, not always at the level of the screen, but some of the roles of a defensive center can be challenging. And I think this would help kind of mitigate some of Victor Wembanyama's learning curve in the NBA. Not that there's going to be a ton, but there will be a little bit. And I think Detroit's a pretty good landing spot next to Duren, who's another long-term piece that I think is going to play really, really well there in Detroit. Also, just looking at the pairing with Jaden Ivey, Cade Cunningham, it's pretty clear to me that this is a good landing spot for Victor Wembanyama. There's not really a bad landing spot, just because Wembanyama is so good that he's going to overhaul and remake the franchise in one single night on May 16th when the draft lottery gets here, which I'm very, very stoked for. I'll be live on the channel the day that happens, so you'll have to stop in, and I'm going to be reacting and breaking down the news on where Wembanyama is going that night. So, and there's a lot of other fun videos on the channel talking about Victor Wembanyama, such as, potential fits for him. We have a NBA Sleeping Giants video on the channel, which I really recommend checking out. But then second overall, we go into the San Antonio Spurs here, which I'm very excited for San Antonio's future as well. As long as they land a top 2, top 3 pick, I feel very, very good about the future of this franchise, because they do have some nice contributors right now, like a Devin Vassell, a Keldon Johnson, a Jeremy Sohan, who they drafted last year. Not to mention guys like Tre Jones as well. There's a lot of decent pieces here in San Antonio. I think they're just really missing the guy. And in this mock, the guy would become Scoot Henderson, because, a lot of people like to act like the games against Victor Wembanyama didn't happen and say, well, outside of that, his film this year wasn't that great. Yeah, but the games happened. He clearly, in display in front of so many executives, GMs, scouts, he showed out in that matchup against Victor Wembanyama and really opened everyone's eyes to what he could potentially become at the NBA level as a predominant pick and roll ball handler with his scoring touch and feel. He's got a really, really nice mid-range jump shot that I think is still progressing. It's not a finished product at this point, but his playmaking upside, his athleticism and dynamism downhill, as a scorer, he really, really reminds me of Anthony Edwards. Now, I know it's a quote-unquote different position, even though we play in somewhat of an era where there's positionless basketball, where typically your best player is your pick-and-roll ball handler anyway. And I think he's got a very similar scoring profile to Ant, despite being a little bit smaller than him. We just saw Ant have a phenomenal postseason game against the Denver Nuggets. He's in the midst of a very good postseason series against Denver, although it is a lopsided series 3-1 at the time I'm recording this. The Spurs here getting a guy like Scoot Henderson, who can be the main player for them when it comes to scoring the ball, but also running the show, being an organizer for them at point guard, something that I think Tre Jones is solid at, but more so in a bench role where he's going to come in and lead a second unit. I think there's a little bit more value in that for a guy like Tre Jones, whereas Scoot Henderson's so skilled, and I think the upside is so immense with him just based on how athletic he is vertically. I see a lot of people overthinking this, talking about, should a different player go second overall? Specifically, Brandon Miller's the one that's been talked about the most. I'm going to say it right now. If a player goes second overall above Scoot Henderson, now it depends on what team ends up moving up to 2 in the lottery, but depending on, if a team's there that needs a guard in some form or fashion, kind of like what San Antonio does, Scoot should be the pick. But if there's going to be a guy that pushes Scoot for the second overall pick, it's going to be Amen Thompson, not Brandon Miller, because Amen Thompson's roughly Brandon Miller's size, a little bit smaller, but he's a heck of a lot more athletic. He's really lightning quick with the ball in his hands. He's a better playmaker than Brandon Miller. The only thing that's a big question right now is shot making, but I think that's going to come around too. So I think Amen Thompson's somebody who's going to make some more noise a little bit later on in the process. This is just a little bit of a foreshadowing to that. We're not at that stage yet, but once we get to the draft combine, which is later in May, and we get to some of those individual workouts, there's going to be a lot more buzz about Amen Thompson. You can bookmark this video if you want, and you can call back to this. Amen Thompson is going to be a guy that really does climb boards later on just because of the athletic traits that he does have. And once he's in, teams' gyms, he's going to start to climb. Third here, we have the Houston Rockets, now a team that in my last mock, when we did a lottery simulation, they moved up to 1, and Victor Wembanyama really does change the projection of this franchise. But I do think one thing is semi-likely and a little bit more likely than a lot of other people seem to think as of right now: a potential James Harden reunion, or at the very worst, the addition of a point guard through free agency. Perhaps a guy like Fred VanVleet. We'll see what happens with our head coach position. I think Nick Nurse should be considered the favorite to land the job, which, by the way, I think is a very, very good hire for an organization that needs a proven head coach who's been a head coach in this league for a little while. I think Houston would benefit greatly on the defensive side of the court with Nick Nurse's style, with the athleticism and just the overall length that they have there in Houston. Now, the question about Alperen Sengun, how does he fit into that? Offensively, he's still skilled enough to stay on the court. So Houston, I think, has got a very good future. And with the understanding that they're going to sign some type of point guard, my preference for them would be Harden, but I could see like a Fred VanVleet type signing. It really does open the door here for a selection of a forward like Brandon Miller, who, if you're looking at Houston long-term and you think, okay, what's really the best course of action here? They have a scoring 2-guard already in a guy in Jalen Green, who I think does have a very nice future in this league, still a very bright future, who just needs a lot of organization, a better head coach, and a better point guard next to him to kind of set him up for success. The best thing long-term is finding another dynamic wing who has shot-making potential, a ton of length to offer on the defensive side of the court to pair with Jabari Smith Jr., and this is where Brandon Miller really steps in. A lot of the time, I feel like I am naturally speaking a little bit more pessimistically about Brandon Miller because I think the consensus on him is a little bit higher than I am. But don't get me wrong, Brandon Miller's still a very, very, very good prospect because, one, he can really shoot the ball from deep, which is what every single team's looking for in draft prospects. If you're a guy who can shoot it, you're pretty much considered a first-round player in a lot of people's eyes. And, well, the fact that Brandon Miller can do that off the bounce, he's also an improving playmaker. I think it's been a little overhyped up to this point about his playmaking progression. But the one thing I do think his progression was very, very notable in was his ability to drive the ball and finish, which is really the difference between what separates a star player and a good player and even a role player. You think about Steph Curry, obviously everyone, gravitates towards the shooting and the outside play. Steph Curry's been a fantastic finisher for a majority of his career, and that's really a big difference between a guy like Steph Curry and Kyle Korver, is the ability to put the ball on the deck, get to spots downhill, and draw in a defense, whether that's to drive and kick or to drive and finish. Brandon Miller has really greatly progressed in there, which is what changed his complexion from maybe being a top 15-ish pick, a lottery selection, to now pretty much a consensus top 4 selection in this year's draft. Houston gets a good player here and somebody who I think does help them greatly long-term. I think Houston is building something very, very good. If they were to add Brandon Miller to Jabari Smith Jr., they're going to have a lot of length, size, shooting upside, and I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to struggle to score on the Rockets at some point down the road, especially if they fill this thing out the right way. Pick 4, the Charlotte Hornets here now at this spot. a team that I think is in a very tricky spot moving forward, especially if they were not to move up in the lottery. We'll see exactly where they fall again on May 16th. But in this mock, 4th overall, I think you just go best player available. Amen Thompson from Overtime Elite. I do really like this kid. I have questions about the level of competition he played against. That's really the number one question around him, both that and the outside shot making. But I do think at times this year he flashed some upside as a scorer, as a shooter from the perimeter that I think can't really be denied. Plus, with his physical traits, his quickness with the ball in his hands, which I think is very important to mention, as well as his overall ability as a downhill player, it's really hard to deny. One of my viewers actually did comment too that I should talk a little bit more about fit, which is why you probably have noticed so far that I've been mentioning more of the current consistent players for these teams. And this is the first part of the video where we think, okay, maybe this isn't as clean of a fit as we would like next to LaMelo Ball. I think it's an intriguing fit because some of the things Amen Thompson does really well are some of the things LaMelo Ball does not do very well. One example is being a downhill finisher. I think LaMelo Ball plays a little bit more of a finesse game. I think Amen Thompson brings a little bit of power there. Now, he does have some finesse elements. He's a very good player when it comes to hop steps and euroing around players, But I do think he's also more of an above-the-rim finisher than what LaMelo Ball currently constitutes as at the NBA level. And I think that also Amen Thompson, kind of a different playmaker. I think more of a downhill playmaker. He's going to feed big men a little bit more frequently, which is going to help Mark Williams here, which is another reason why I think he's actually a decent fit. It's a little clunky, don't get me wrong, but I think that there's ways that you can have two similar-ish point guards playing together. You think about Chris Paul and James Harden, the amount of success they found early on in Houston. Their first year together, they won 60-plus games. Now, is Charlotte going to have, those two level of players? No, I don't think so. I don't think Amen Thompson or LaMelo Ball are as good as James Harden was at that point of his career, but I do think that Charlotte is still a team that should be in talent acquisition mode, and I think the fit's a little bit more intriguing than a lot of people would initially presume just based on position, quote-unquote position. Pick 5, we move on to Portland, and you see that little asterisk there for Portland. That denotes a likely trade destination during the draft. If Portland does not move up to pick 1, I think this pick is going to be heavily shopped. But also you could say the inverse, where maybe Damian Lillard becomes available and Portland's maybe picking some extra selections this year, or as early as this year, or perhaps in the future as well, if a Damian Lillard trade were to go down. So there's a couple ways to think about it. One, you look at Portland's front office, what they did last year drafting Shaedon Sharpe. Clearly they drafted off of upside. I think a very wise decision for them. I think Shaedon Sharpe could potentially become one of the key faces of that franchise when it comes to actual talent level and the upside that I think he flashed this year in what I think was a very good rookie season for him with no college experience. It was very impressive. So theoretically, this pick, if it did stay for Portland, would make some sense based on their draft history, but also for a team looking to move up, maybe say in Oklahoma City. There's a few others. New Orleans could potentially be a team looking to jump up here with the amount of draft assets that they have. Utah, another example. Ausar Thompson, the twin brother of Amen Thompson. He has a lot of the same characteristics, very similar frame, again at 6'7", but he's more of a wing type player. He's a little bit less consistent with the ball in his hands. I think the ball handling he's flashed a ton of, whereas Amen Thompson, we know he's going to be a fantastic ball handler who can get downhill very frequently. Ausar Thompson's had less success consistently doing it, but he's had some very bright moments with the ball in his hands still as well. He's a phenomenal breakout passer. After grabbing defensive boards, he does a very good job getting his eyes up the court and outletting the ball, which is something that I think is a very underrated element. And for Portland, if they were to keep this pick, it's an upside selection, right? He's somebody who I could see him growing into some type of offensive star with incredible off-ball potential as a slasher cutter type. His shot making is a little bit further along than Amen Thompson's as well, but I think it's still got room to grow. And could you just imagine both him and Shaedon Sharpe flying around on the wings, two of the more athletic wing players in the league? I think it would be a lot of fun to watch. Plus just the upside and the talent between those two guys on all three levels as scorers would become very dangerous. But this is also a player that if a trade were to come around, a team like OKC or New Orleans or one of those teams that have a lot of assets like Utah they wanted to move up, Ausar Thompson's the type of talent that if they wanted to buy into and believe in, it's very realistic that we could see a team move up for him on draft night, which obviously does reshuffle the board. And a lot of my mocks have been looking at Jarace Walker as kind of the clear 5th overall selection. This mock shook up a little bit because of the idea of a potential trade for a high-end prospect, a guy like an Ausar Thompson, and perhaps, Portland gets into the market here for buying players. Now, if you ask me who they're trading for, I think that's a little less clear, but Portland could be in a spot where they could make a world of decisions, potentially a 3-team type deal as well. There's a lot of ways to look at this, obviously, but from a trade perspective, Ausar would be very intriguing to a lot of teams, but also for Portland's just recent draft history with their new management front office situation. I think Ausar still fits the bill there as well. Pick 6, the Orlando Magic here now. And Orlando, who has 2 picks in the lottery in this mock draft with no lottery simulation, I feel like they're in a spot where this maybe isn't the clear, like, oh, well, this is the pick, they should take this. This is more of a, we don't really need this, but we feel like this guy's just a really, really good basketball player. And that's Jarace Walker out of Houston. I just don't really see a world that he falls below 6. And if he does, he's probably not getting past 7. So for me in a mock, it just feels really, really safe to put him here at this spot because he's a fantastic skilled player who can play with his back to the basket. He's flashed a really nice turnaround jump shot, but he's also pretty good as a face-up 4-man as well, who can put the ball on the deck, get to his spots and elevate. He's also one of the few guys that I'd actually trust shooting fading away from the hoop in this class so far. And that, it's very early on in their development. Obviously, none of them have played an NBA game yet. A lot of guys can develop that and add that to their game as their careers progress. But to come in with that is pretty special, especially for his size. At 6'8", 240 pounds, he's pretty quick on his feet for that weight. He's very versatile athletically and somebody who I think can defend multiple positions. For the fit with Orlando, it's a little clunkier, like I said, just because I think this team needs a little bit more perimeter 3-point shooting. But with having another pick a little bit later on in this draft, I think we can maybe address that there. And then with Jarace Walker, you just draft off of talent and you throw him in next to Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, Wendell Carter, and you say, let's have some fun because we're going to be big, strong, physical, kind of build something similar to what we've seen from the Knicks so far, which has been having some pretty nice postseason success this year already. Pick 7, we move on to the Indiana Pacers, who I have them going with Taylor Hendricks. This felt like a lock shoe-in for me with the Pacers at this spot. The Pacers really, really badly need forward play, and Taylor Hendricks is one of my guys. I really, really love this kid and his ability to not only shoot the ball, but defensively. I think there's an argument that he could be the best rim protector in college in this year's draft class. Now, I'm not going to say that without a doubt. I think Dereck Lively would like to have a word with me if you heard me say that, but there's a good argument to be had that this guy is willing to stick his nose in there, risk getting put on a poster, and oftentimes find success being the primary shot blocker for a UCF team that, was a little up and down this year for sure. But Taylor Hendricks was really not that much up and down. I think he's a very, very good player who is going to translate to the NBA very, very smoothly, especially over the first 2-3 years of his career. And if you think about Indiana's needs, this is perfectly addressing some of the stuff that they want to add. Another rim protector around Miles Turner, who already gets a ton of blocks per game himself. You had a second guy like that who can offer some length, versatility. Defensively, he blocks a ton of 3-point shots too. My current NBA comp for him would be Jaden McDaniels for the Minnesota Timberwolves, who obviously, hopefully, Taylor Hendricks doesn't break his wrist or hand punching a wall. But I'm very, very high on Jaden McDaniels. I think he should be an all-defense team member this year. With how he played, he was very, very good and very important for Minnesota as not only their best on-ball defender, but also their second-best rim protector as a weak-side guy who can come over, block shots, pinning off the glass. Taylor Hendricks, his college film defensively looks very, very similar to Jaden McDaniels' college film from UW. So I really like this kid. I think, again, offensively too, his ability to space the floor, his ability to play with physicality as a driver. He still has a long way to go in terms of being a shot maker. That's why he's not a perfect comparison to Jaden McDaniels, who I think flashed a little bit more of that while being quite a bit less efficient. Hendricks was more efficient from 3 than McDaniels during his time in college. But I do think that just loosely, the comparison works pretty well. And that's the exact type of player I think Indiana needs at this point to take that next step forward and maybe become a play-in or playoff team outright. Pick 8, we move on to the Washington Wizards, who finally have started moving in the right direction, in my opinion, after moving off of Tommy Shepard, somebody who I think kind of embodied mediocrity as a GM with some of his decisions that he made. And now at this spot, I feel like the Wizards are in a really, really good position to add talent. Now, obviously, we'd love to see them move up in the draft lottery and kind of reset the table for them. But assuming they're around pick 8 in this draft, a guy like Anthony Black, I do think really helps their current roster if it stays the same. Now, there's big questions about what a new GM or new president would look to do with the roster. Does he kind of overhaul everything, or do they try and run it back one more year, see what they have, and then make decisions from there? We will have a Wizards offseason preview on the channel rather soon, but I think Anthony Black is a really good fit onto their current roster because they need, I think, an organizer, a point guard who can be a facilitator for others while still giving them some really good defensive versatility. At 6'7", I think Black's going to be a really good off-ball defender because of his length, his kind of intangibles and smarts to get into a passing lane or to come help over off the wing and get his hands on the basketball. He does a very good job of that. But he's also somebody who defensively has shown the willingness and ability to stay in a guy's hip, bump him off of his driving lane, and really, disrupt the offense. Now, does he consistently win in those battles right now? No, I think being in an NBA weight room is going to go a long way in helping him win some of those battles as a stronger, quicker player. I think that's really going to elevate his game. But he's got all the smarts in the world to be a good NBA player. This is one of my guys as well. Him and Taylor Hendricks are two guys I'm going to bet on for their career. I think that they're going to be very, very good NBA players who last a really long time in this league. And for Black specifically, I think Washington's a good landing spot because even if they do pivot, change up their roster, he could be one of the cornerstone pieces. For me, honestly, he's somebody who I think could be Josh Giddey, but better because of the defensive side of the ball. Pick 9, we move on to the Utah Jazz here now, who, after their trades this past off season where they moved off of Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, I think the Jazz are kind of in a very strong spot, especially with how, both of those teams have looked in the first round. It's possible that both Minnesota and Cleveland could look to make some moves at some point. So Utah may be feeling good about those long-term selections that they have. But Cam Whitmore would be a really nice start here for them in this year's draft of adding a big physical wing who can defend across multiple positions. Now, I think he's really raw yet at this point in terms of his defensive technique and his ability to actually disrupt offenses on the defensive side. But if you're looking at it from a frame, physical, athletic standpoint, he's one of the better options in this year's class. He's at 6'8", around 230 pounds. He's very, very strong and built. He's somebody who's going to step into the NBA right away, and he's not going to get bumped off his spot very much as a driver, as a slasher, which is really his primary strength offensively. Now, I think he needs to progress as a drive and kick guy. His playmaking is a little subpar and suboptimal. But if you're Utah, it's all about talent acquisition. And off of Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler, if you just add good, strong players, there's not really a lot to worry about in terms of fit. Because at some point, I think Kessler is going to be able to step up behind the three-point line and knock it down a little bit more consistently. He flashed that a little bit at Auburn back when he was playing in his sophomore year there. And then also for Lauri, I mean, obviously has an inside-out game, can play kind of both ways as a slasher, can play inside out of the post a little bit, but really does excel with the ball in his hands too. So slashing, cutting off of him makes some sense. Big physical defenders, I think, is really what helps this team take the next step forward. That's what they were lacking during Mitchell and Gobert's tenure together. They were lacking the big physical wings who could guard the Kawhi Leonards, Paul Georges of the world, which is why we ultimately saw Dallas with Doncic give them some troubles. We saw Kawhi and PG knock them out of the postseason one year as well. They just need more size, more length, more physicality long term. And I think that's a team building thing that Danny Ainge considers strongly. You look back to his draft history in Boston, specifically Jason Tatum, Jalen Brown. If there's an opportunity here to get a good, strong wing, he's going to take it. And I think he fits in really well here, grabbing Cam Whitmore 9th overall. Pick 10, Dallas Mavericks. You see another asterisk here because I think this is another trade destination where a team could potentially look to move up, or the Mavericks just really wanting to move out of this pick, either for future assets to try and reload up for another trade, which is, again, why I think OKC could make some sense. I think that Utah moving up from their other pick or one of their 2 picks in the first round could also make quite a bit of sense. Dallas needs more depth. They need more options in trade talks. So moving out of 10 does really make some sense if the Mavericks do end up keeping this past draft lottery night, which is somewhat of a non-possibility as well. but we'll see. So 10th overall here, I have the Mavericks looking at Nick Smith Jr. with the idea of trading him. Now, I know that Nick Smith Jr. is not somebody that the Mavericks really need on this roster, assuming they keep Kyrie Irving and that Jaden Hardy takes the next step forward like I'm suspecting, someone I really liked in last year's draft process. In my opinion, you could argue he was one of the steals of the draft last year for Dallas in the second round. But Nick Smith Jr., I think, could be a really nice pickup for a team here at this spot. Moving up. Now, again, there's quite a few options. There's quite a few teams that I think would strongly consider moving up. I wouldn't even rule out New Orleans as well, who's a few picks away at this spot. If Dallas can move back, add in extra stuff to their roster, whether that's depth pieces right now that fit around Kyrie and Luka, specifically a center, the Mavericks need to find ways to improve. And at this spot, based on how the board played out, I don't really think that they have a strong way to doing that. Taylor Hendricks, Jarace Walker are the two best fits in the draft for Dallas, in my opinion, for what they really need. I'd prefer Taylor Hendricks over pretty much anybody other than Victor Wembanyama in terms of a fit standpoint for this team. Not that Hendricks is the most talented, but from a fit perspective over anyone but not named Victor, I think Hendricks fits better. But with that off the board here, I think Dallas is in a spot where they need to find a way to trade out. Add in either more future picks for trade flexibility. So you could see a Utah jump up here. Again, this is kind of the trickiest spot in the draft in my eyes because Dallas, I just would be shocked if they use this pick for themselves on draft night, especially if the board plays out this way. Pick 11, we see the Oklahoma City Thunder here now, a team that probably feels really good about what's out there for them because this is a player I think a lot of Thunder fans want, and I could see a guy like Sam Presti take a big swing upside wise on a player like G.G. Jackson here, where with how the way the board's fallen, I know Thunder fans, just like Dallas, I'd say would really prefer Hendricks and or Jarace Walker in terms of what kind of the soft spots are for Oklahoma City right now, some of the things that they need to address. Physicality, rebounding, and rim protection are really at the top of the board for them. G.G. Jackson maybe doesn't do any of those things right now, but the hope is that G.G. Jackson maybe becomes a superstar or a star level player, an all-star type, because he has flashed, even at South Carolina when the team was struggling and he wasn't very efficient. There's moments where you turn on the tape of this, can you say, oh my goodness, like his ability to handle the ball at his size at around 6'9". He's very, very athletic. I mean, just casually throws down East Bay dunks, which if you don't know, that's when he takes it between his legs and just tomahawk slams it with no problems. Those are some of the exciting upside moments for him. He's also flashed as a high-low passer a little bit. OKC, a big part of what they're looking to build with Sam Presti, and Thunder fans, you can attest to this. They want guys who can dribble, pass, and shoot. And at the power forward spot, it's possible G.G. Jackson could grow into becoming the epitome of that. As of right now, I don't think he is. I think the three-point shot's a little lackluster, inconsistent, I would say. He's got the handle though, and that's really one of the hard things to teach for a player his size, is somebody who's that natural and fluid with the ball in their hands. And you hope that at some point he starts making all the right reads, which I think was a little inconsistent as well. And like I said, the shot making wasn't consistent, but with OKC's track record when it comes to development, player progression, and also just getting players to play the right way in a system, they seemingly have knocked it out of the park with Mark Daigneault pretty much every single year he's been their head coach. So why not add G.G. Jackson, a player that if you get everything out of him that you think you possibly can, there's potential top 5 talent in the class here. Now, is he going to get there? I can't guarantee that, which is why he has not gone top 5 in any of my mock drafts. And if you only specifically watch highlights, you'd be way higher on this kid than I currently am. I'm not the biggest G.G. Jackson guy, but I can understand the appeal, especially for a team like Oklahoma City, that if they do get this pick right, and I mean get it right big time, like G.G. Jackson potentially could become, the fit is so apparent onto the way that they play, the position that they need specifically with some more length, size, athleticism defensively. I think G.G. Jackson could be a home run pick, but it could also be a huge strikeout in what was an opportunity for this team to take another good step forward. But adding Chet Holmgren in next year as a rookie as well doesn't help, or doesn't hurt, your odds at just being naturally better through internal progression. Pick 12, the Orlando Magic on the clock again. Remember, they went with Jarace Walker, 6 overall, and now 6 spots later, I have them addressing that shooting need that we talked about a little bit earlier on. This is one of the clear, obvious fits into the draft up to this point. Now, the NBA draft isn't like the NFL where, oh, we need a cornerback, we might as well draft a corner. That's not really how the NBA works. You just should draft best player available a lot of the time and try and make it work. But if you can find the right player that also fits while addressing some needs, whether that's shooting or playmaking or somebody who can protect the rim, rebound the basketball, that's always great. And I think Gradey Dick's a very good player who fits into that kind of best player available discussion at this spot, while also really providing key fit and need into a skill set that Orlando is lacking. They finished bottom 5 in 3-point percentage, or in 3-point attempts, excuse me. And then they also finished bottom 7 in 3-point percentage this year. So Orlando just didn't shoot very many threes. And when they did, they weren't very good at it. So why not add a guy who shot above 40% from 3 on pretty high volume for Kansas? But don't worry, that's not the only thing he does. He's a fantastic offensive rebounder at 6'8". Defensively, he's going to get targeted, but I don't think he's an absolute walk through, oh, this guy can't guard anybody. I think he's going to be a smart team defender. I think he's going to put himself and his body in positions to find success. It's just about athletically, is he going to always win those matchups? No, but there's a lot of moments in the league where guys are outmatched athletically, but still sometimes get the better of the battle anyway. And I think Gradey Dick could find himself in that spot. Specifically, if you have Jarace Walker already, Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Wendell Carter, Bull, who I know Magic fans are kind of out on a little bit, but I mean, there's still a lot of length there. They have a lot of length defense around him. Jonathan Isaac, I haven't even mentioned yet. And they have athleticism at the guard spots too. I think Gradey Dick could really fit in and give them something they don't currently have. Pick 13, Toronto Raptors here now at this spot. And I actually went with Jalen Hood-Schifino for this pick, which is a big shakeup. Everyone say, welcome Jalen Hood-Schifino to the lottery, because this is the first time I've mocked him in the top 14 in this year's draft process, which goes to show that these mocks are always ever changing. There's slight adjustments being made every single time. And not just because I feel like changing something, it's because I've thought and considered some things more. And with Toronto moving off of a point guard potentially, Fred VanVleet being the guy, in this case, that's probably out the door. I mentioned him as a potential signing option for Houston earlier on in this mock. Toronto is a team then looking for a point guard. And this is quite a bit of a stylistic difference for Masai Ujiri to land on, because Fred VanVleet, a little bit smaller, quick, and somebody who uses his hands defensively really well. Completely different player from Jalen Hood-Schifino, who I think is more of a cerebral point guard, not quite as quick as Fred VanVleet. I don't think he has quite as good range as Fred VanVleet, but I think he's a little bit more of that natural pick and roll point guard. He's not necessarily just looking to score, but he's capable of doing so. And has the prototypical size you're looking for now at around 6'4", 6'5" at the position. I like Hood-Schifino. I think he's very smart. I think he's a pro-ready point guard who you put him in 20 pick and rolls right now on day one of his NBA career, and you're probably walking away with 1.0 points per possession, which isn't great, but for a rookie, it's definitely not bad. And that's why I think he makes a lot of sense here for Toronto. I think in terms of the players that they're losing and the players that they need, you add a little bit of a bigger player here. We'll see what they do with head coach now that Nick Nurse is gone. I think that's going to give us a little bit of direction and guidance into what they're potentially looking for. Last time the Raptors had a head coaching vacancy, obviously kind of turned internal for where they were looking. Now I think it's possible Masai looks outside of the organization at this point, but we'll see. Last time they looked internal, they found a way to win a championship. So we'll see what they look to do, but I think Hood-Schifino is a really good option for them here at a potential position of need going into this offseason around this draft time. Pick 14, we move on to the New Orleans Pelicans. At this pick, I think the Pelicans are in a position where they should be looking to just add best player available and some really good talent. And you could make a case here that Cason Wallace has slid way too far down the draft. I think a lot of people look at him as a top 10-ish player, and I would tend to agree somewhere in that range. I think he's going to be a very, very good player who has a very nice career ahead of him because he's smart, instinctual defensively, and I think the steps he's taken forward offensively ensure that he's somebody who's going to be able to stay on the court. And for New Orleans, I know last year they went with Dyson Daniels. Here at this pick, I think the only real position of need for New Orleans that you could maybe argue is center, but even then with what Larry Nance gave him this year, Jonas Valanciunas is a consistent double-double machine. Jackson Hayes comes off the bench every once in a while as well. I mean, center doesn't really feel like a need. The Pelicans are in a spot where they have a lot of really good young players, a lot of players I like on this team. And if Zion Williamson could just play in 60, 70 games a year, they'd probably be a top 4 seed in the Western Conference. So there's not a lot of needs, and it's kind of hard here looking for a lottery player to say, oh, this is going to address team need or this is going to fit in somehow. I just think add more talent. It becomes a trade chip for you later if you need to make a bigger move and kind of reshuffle your deck a little bit, which I think could become a potential option for New Orleans quicker than a lot of other people seem to think currently. And then Cason Wallace is just a smart, good basketball player that if you're not just looking at it from a trade perspective, this guy can step in and win. And I'm very confident in that. I know Kentucky didn't do as much winning as they're typically used to this year. They weren't bad by any stretch, but they weren't dominant or great like we've seen them in the past. So, people could argue that, oh, maybe Cason Wallace doesn't impact winning as much as I'm saying. I think he does. I think he's somebody who defensively is very smart. I think this helps New Orleans on the side of the ball that they really need more help, which is just more defensively smart players, specifically defensive guards who can shuffle their feet, stay in front of guys. But also, I think Cason Wallace, one of the more underrated elements to his game is he brings help defense as a guard. And that's a very rare trait to find. A lot of guards get washed out when it comes to help defense just because they're not very big or strong. I think Cason Wallace, with his incredible wingspan, I think he's going to really surprise some people with his level of defense he's able to play at the NBA level. Pick 15, we move on to the Atlanta Hawks here, who I have going with Jordan Hawkins. For Atlanta, obviously the DeJounte Murray move was the big headliner this past offseason, and they made some other moves as well. One of those was getting rid of Kevin Huerter, who shot 40% from three this past year. Now, the price that Sacramento paid for him, I thought was pretty steep because they sacrificed a lot of flexibility just based on the protections on that draft pick that they traded. But it was still a really good acquisition for them and a player that has really been a key part of Sacramento's success this year. And I think kind of a missing element to what Atlanta has really needed, which is a little bit more floor spacing, a guy who's willing to move off the ball as a shooter. If Trae Young could just buy into doing that, he'd be really fantastic. And I think the Hawks would be so much better. But we're just never going to see Trae Young play that way, in my opinion. So let's get a guy who does. Jordan Hawkins, he's really willing to run off of Sagers. That's basically all he did his entire time at UConn. Now, he does have some serious flaws that a lot of people are overlooking. Some people expect him to step into the NBA as some type of star. He's not going to be that because he's not very good inside the arc as a scorer. Like I said earlier with Steph Curry, part of what separates him from a Kyle Korver is the fact that he's able to beat guys off the bounce and get to spots downhill, get 2 feet in the paint and finish. Jordan Hawkins is terrible in that regard. If you turn on the tape, he does not finish well around the rim, especially around length and size. If you give him a clean runway, yeah, he'll dunk it. Cool. He's not going to get a lot of clean runways in the NBA. It's just the way that the league is. Guys always look better in transition than they do in the half court. The reason for that is because transition usually is clean runways. Half court is usually not. So how does a guy like Jordan Hawkins survive around a Rudy Gobert or a Joel Embiid in the paint? He probably doesn't. But luckily for him, in Atlanta, he's not going to be tasked to do that when you have a DeJounte Murray, a Trae Young, and some other key pieces that you like to play your offense through. Hawkins is more about floor spacing, gravity, and just keeping the court open for some of the guys who actually have the ball in their hands a little bit more consistently. Pick 16, the Utah Jazz here now. This pick comes from those Timber Pups out in Minnesota. So a lot of credit to Utah just for the trades that they pulled off. Again, I've already hyped them up a little bit, but they're just in a very strong commanding spot for the next 6-7 years if you look at their overall draft haul that they have moving forward. And I think a player here that would be a really nice pickup for them is Keyonte George. So remember, we went with Cam Whitmore 9th overall. We come back and now address a backcourt position in Keyonte George. And I know Jazz fans right now are saying, whoa, we have Colin Sexton, we have Jordan Clarkson. Do we really need to make a move like this with Keyonte George, who's kind of I think, going to translate as a bench scoring guard who maybe could be a starter as well in a similar type role where he's looking to score the ball, not really be a true point guard, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think for Utah, there's a serious need here long term. I know Jazz fans love Clarkson. I know that the Jazz ownership loves Jordan Clarkson as well. But at the end of the day, with all of these selections, if you're not trading off to get something bigger or better, you have to take a long-term approach at things. And Clarkson's in his 30s. Is that someone you're planning on having 6 years from now? If you love him, yes, but not in a starting role and definitely not in a key contributor role. So that's why you take somebody like Keyonte George, who 5-6 years from now, he's going to be 24, 25-ish. He's going to be able to step in and I think give you really good minutes pretty consistently, especially when he's on fire. He's one of the streakiest shooters in this year's draft. I mean that in a good way, where when he's hot, oh my goodness, he's hot. He's going to hit a fading 3 in the corner. He's going to come down the next time, hit a pull-up 3 in your face. Keyonte George, for Utah, it's hard to talk about fit because there's just a lot of open spots right now. Outside of Kessler and Markkanen, I just don't think that there's a lot on this roster currently. I just think it's about going best player available, go with high upside, and continue to add good pieces moving forward for Will Hardy, who I think is a fantastic coach. Pick 17, the Los Angeles Lakers here now at this spot, who are on the cusp of maybe pulling off a first-round upset. ESPN would tell you it's not an upset, but I think it is, and I think if Steven Adams and Brandon Clark were healthy, that series would look very, very differently. But the Lakers right now have a new lease on life. Started the playoffs 0-0, and now they're up 2-1 in the series at the time I'm recording this. They have to feel very good about their odds moving forward. But a guy that I think could help them pass this season is Kris Murray, another player who offers some good size, length, and three-point shooting around Anthony Davis and LeBron James. The Lakers have just looked so much more like a basketball team since the trade deadline. I don't think the subtraction of Russ is necessarily the reason why. I just think it's the addition of three good players who fit into roles on their team. For the longest time, I've been talking about role definition and role clarity on the channel. With D'Angelo Russell, pretty clear from his post-game comments that he knows he's not a point guard, he's just a basketball player. He's going to play off the ball a lot of the time in LA, and he's okay with that seemingly, as long as they're winning. And it seems like he likes playing with Anthony Davis and LeBron James. And there's always a little bit of drama with D'Lo. That's just how it is. That's the type of player that he is. He's just not been able to escape the drama in his time in the NBA, but that's okay because he's still a pretty nice talent who I think can shoot the ball fairly well. And Jared Vanderbilt was a really great addition for them defensively. I think Kris Murray falls in line in the front court behind Jared Vanderbilt, behind Anthony Davis clearly, and he just gives them a rotational front court player next season who, just like his brother Keegan, can shoot the three ball. Now, he's not going to make as many threes as a rookie as Keegan did this year, which was a record breaker, by the way. But the Lakers here just get a safe, solid pick, which is just the Lakers. If they're smart, they're going to value team building and continuity and role players over just the search of a third star, if they're smart. We'll see if they're smart because Rob Pelinka just does some crazy stuff sometimes. But I think Kris Murray's very safe selection, very smart selection, fits this team very well. And oh, by the way, who knows? If they get hot this postseason, they can make a really deep run as well. We'll see what happens, but the Lakers are in a pretty decent spot just with how the series against Memphis has started out. Pick 18, the Miami Heat here now. And at this spot, I like Dariq Whitehead for the Miami Heat, which is kind of an interesting switch up from where I've seen him going in some of my other mocks. Dariq Whitehead, I don't believe I've mocked him to Miami yet. And the reason I've landed on this here ultimately is, while they've had a nice start to their series as well against Milwaukee, I think when this team's at their best, they have, again, more floor spacing around Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler. And I think with Duncan Robinson kind of not panning out the way that they hoped he would after signing him to that bigger contract, it's just been kind of a, okay, what does Gabe Vincent give us? What does Max Strus give us? And luckily, those two players have contributed a lot. Now, Strus is headed toward free agency this offseason. We'll see what type of contract he gets. But I think it's important for Miami to continue to look for shooters, and Dariq Whitehead's a really good example of this. When he won National Player of the Year for Montverde Academy, he was a fantastic shooter, both in the mid-range and the three-point areas, but he's also got the athletic profile to get to the rim, finish around the rim. I think, honestly, he's going to be a very, very good player. I think he's going to be a sneaky pickup in this year's draft, kind of like what we saw from AJ Griffin for the Atlanta Hawks, somebody who really shined his rookie season despite getting drafted outside of the lottery. I think Dariq Whitehead's going to follow a similar trajectory. Funny enough, both Duke prospects as well. Dariq Whitehead, if he didn't deal with some injuries and missing some time early in his freshman year, I think we would have seen him a little bit more established, a little bit more featured and focused on in that offense. But since he missed some time, I think his role never became clearly defined. In Miami, it's very obvious. Hey, we want you out there to score the ball, shoot the ball, and be an offensive threat, which is everything that he can provide. And I think, Caleb Martin gave the Heat a lot this year in terms of production and ability. And I think that Dariq Whitehead could kind of fill a similar role, but with a little bit more perimeter shooting, a little bit less wild. But I think there's a lot of positives from Martin being as wild as he was for Miami as well. Here we get to the Golden State Warriors now, and the Warriors even the series up against the Sacramento Kings 2-2 the day that I'm recording this. So they're in a really fun spot as well in terms of trying to continue their dynasty, but also looking to add in some more young pieces that maybe help extend their time. And we're just at a spot where we have to wonder, did they really go maybe 1 for 3 or 2 for 3 at best with the Wiseman, Kuminga, Moody selections. And where do they go from here? Do they go with a younger prospect and try and maybe take another big swing on a guy that could grow into being a nice long-term piece? Or do they look for someone right now that specifically can step in as early as next year, fit their scheme, fit their system, and really try and help this team win ASAP? And I think that's the answer that they should go for, which is why I'm mocking them. Trayce Jackson-Davis here from Indiana. I don't really think there's a better fit in this year's draft than this selection right now. Trayce Jackson-Davis, a very, very skilled post passer. In his time in Indiana, Mike Woodson used him a lot of the time that way, specifically out of double teams. Now, Trayce Jackson-Davis is not going to get doubled in the NBA, but the beautiful thing about playing with Golden State is Steph Curry gets doubled when he doesn't have the ball. Klay Thompson occasionally gets doubled when he doesn't have the ball, and it's not intentional. A lot of it comes out of their post-split series, which is very, very beautiful. At some point, sometime, I will plan on making a video completely focused on Golden State's post-split and all the different actions that they've done out of it and how phenomenal of a coach Steve Kerr is. But sometimes when it's not Draymond Green passing, I think Wiggins has found success there as a passer in that role. And they've also used small guys in that role before too, which is pretty creative. But I think, Trayce Jackson-Davis just has more upside as a facilitator than a guy like Kevon Looney does. Now, Looney has been huge for Golden State in their run here, and I don't think he gets enough love or credit for his impact on winning there in Golden State. But I think a guy like TJD could step in and really give them some valuable minutes and play in that similar style role where he's going to be a selfless player who helps this team win. And by the way, he also protects the rim fairly well, and I think he can play with some good pace that matches the way that they play in the regular season. Pick 20, the Houston Rockets here now. This pick comes from the Los Angeles Clippers in a trade we saw during the trade deadline live streams that I had this year. So if you were there, shout out to you guys for watching at that time. But I have Dereck Lively going here now at pick 20. And I think for Houston, earlier on, I remember we went with Brandon Miller, and I kind of talked about Alperen Sengun and some of his defensive limitations. He struggled this year defensively protecting the rim, which, I mean, you look at him and you're not shocked by that. I think athletically he's a little underrated, but he's still not a good athlete, and he's still not somebody who I'm going to trust as a rim protector. That doesn't mean he's a bad player, and it definitely doesn't mean he's not someone Houston should stay invested in for their long-term future. I think talent-wise, offensively specifically, he's got a lot of gifts and a lot of skills. But now it's about finding guys who maybe open up different avenues for you, different styles that you want to play specifically on the defensive end. And offensively, too, this guy is completely different than Alperen Sengun, who's kind of more of a mid-high post player with, some ball handling capabilities. Dereck Lively doesn't give you those things. But Dereck Lively is a triple R center, which I think would fit really well into Houston as a rim protector, a roller, and a rim runner. Those are the 3 R's. Rim, roll. And those are really the things that you need out of a center in today's NBA, specifically when it comes to winning basketball. You think back to Clint Capella, his role in Houston with some of those James Harden, Chris Paul teams, specifically is really when he stands out the most from his old film there in Houston. And I think Lively fills a very similar role, but I think he's a little bit more freaky when it comes to the defensive side of the floor. And what I mean by that is he's longer at 7'1", he's taller, and he's more athletic vertically than Capella was, which I think becomes more and more and more of a physical treat for the Houston Rockets when it comes to switching up their defense, the way that they want to play, and adding a little bit more rim protection, size, and shot blocking onto a backline that I think really badly needs it. You think about the length that they would have between Jabari Smith, who also blocks a good amount of shots, Brandon Miller, who I think will block a decent amount of shots with his length just in general, and some decent athleticism. Now you add Dereck Lively to the mix, who, by the way, had an 8-block game this year in college, and his blocks per 40 minutes are off the chart. I just think he's going to be a really nice player in this league. I think he's somebody I would invest in. I think I'd invest in him earlier than pick 20 as well. To be honest, I prefer him over quite a few players who've already been drafted in this mock draft. This is not a big board, obviously, so my overall ranking doesn't play into this too much, but it does a little bit, and I think Houston's here getting quite a bit of a steal. Pick 21, we have the Brooklyn Nets here. They actually have back-to-back selections, 21 and 22. And to start it off, I have them going with Jett Howard. I switched it up quite a bit in this mock for Brooklyn, just based on how things played out in their playoff series against the Philadelphia 76ers. I think the Nets are going to shake some things up quite a bit this offseason. It's going to be a very, very busy offseason. We could potentially see picks 21 and 22 moved on draft night as well, maybe for a guy like Damian Lillard in Portland, who I referenced earlier, as a potential trade spot. So there should maybe be an asterisk here for this pick getting moved. But if they stick here, a guy like Jett Howard translates pretty well to the NBA, specifically with the way that Brooklyn would maybe hope to use him early in his career, because, well, for a few reasons. Let's look at some of his efficiencies in college and some of the things he was very, very good at, which I really want to highlight now at this spot, with where he kind of found success. As a pick and roll ball handler, when he was playing as the primary ball handler, his team scored 0.935 points per possession, which for a college rank is very good, based on kind of standings and where the percentiles rank. When he's the pick and roll ball handler and the defense commits to him, he scores 1.0 points per possession, which is an excellent rating. And then as a spot up shooter as well, he scored 1.112 points per possession, which for percentile rankage is 86th percentile, which is again excellent. So he's somebody who can play off the ball, did very, very well in that role as a spot up shooter, but also showcased that he could do a lot more. Now, a lot of those pick and roll actions came out of the Zoom. And for Brooklyn, if you're just looking to add talent, a guy who can maybe bring a little bit more offensively than what they currently have and what they showed against Philadelphia, which we all knew was going to be the problem going into that series. I think Jett Howard does make some sense and is somebody who could really help this team out both now and long term. And then 22, staying on the topic of the Brooklyn Nets, I have Noah Clowney here for them. This is another obvious fit situation. Jacques Vaughn, I mean, the guy already had gray hair, but he probably, I don't know how he even stayed sane sometimes with Brooklyn's rebounding epidemic. They just could not rebound the basketball. Noah Clowney's a pretty solid rebounder. Look, it's pick 22. You're not going to find the next Andre Drummond here. This is not going to be a guy that grabs 12, 13, 14 rebounds a game during his career. But if he can help you grab 8, that's a benefit. And that's something that Brooklyn needs help with. So Noah Clowney, maybe the upside's not as high, but he is somebody who can also step out behind the three-point line, knock it down a little bit. Alabama plays a very pro-style offense, so there's really not going to be too much of an adjustment period if they need him to play minutes early on in his career and really give them a boost off the bench behind Claxton. I think Clowney could fill that in and give them a little bit of an added boost. So he's an effort guy. He's a hustle guy. He's a type of get-out-of-the-mud type player, which the more you have of that, the better. I mean, look at, again, how the Knicks are playing in this postseason. They have a lot of effort guys. Josh Hart's a great example of that. Josh Hart would really help the Brooklyn Nets, funny enough, even though he's a guard or kind of wing type player. His rebounding would be huge for that team. I think Noah Clowney could definitely fill in that role, though, a little bit as kind of a rebounder and doesn't really clunk up your offense too much because of where he's able to space out to on the floor. Pick 23, the Blazers now on the clock again. Remember, potentially could be picking 21 and 22 and then 23rd. We'll see what happens on draft night. I think this offseason is going to be really crazy, by the way. And 23rd, this pick comes from the New York Knicks, and I have them going with Rayan Rupert here, which is a little bit of a switch up. Rayan Rupert typically have not mocked him to Portland this offseason very much, but I do think that the Blazers could look for a little bit more defensive length, versatility, and Rupert offers a lot of that. I think Rupert really projects best as a defensive player. Offensively, he's got a little bit of a ways to go in terms of being an offensive producer. But Portland right now, again, this is another team where it's hard to talk about specific fit because I think he does fit next to Dame. I think he fits next to Anthony Simons, which I don't know which route they go. Do they keep Simons and trade Dame? Do they trade Simons and keep Dame and try and win now? Then Rupert is probably not part of the team, and they probably trade Rupert somewhere on draft night or something like that, trying to bring in some talent. They've got both pathways are open. Rupert could be a player that interests other teams because of some of the long-term potential, upside, the length, the athleticism that he possesses, and I think the progression pathway is good for him. He's learning how to play with his left hand a little bit this year, which is huge. He didn't do a lot of that before this season, so I still think there's a long ways for him to go in terms of being a good NBA player. But at 23, if you're getting a guy that you think 2-3 years from now could be a consistent role player for you, you're doing pretty decent on draft night. 24, the Sacramento Kings here are now at this spot, and I have them going with Brandon Podziemski, which does not really address fit or need as much as, well, I think it does address fit actually very, very well. It does not address need very well for Sacramento. And Kings fans might say, well, we need more defense. And trust me, I know this team definitely does need more defense. I think they need a rim protector. Right? They ranked in the bottom 2 for sure in the NBA in blocks per game. they just do not protect the rim very well. That's kind of an MO of a Domantas Sabonis team. Typically, you're going to have some issues on that side of the floor a little bit. And Brandon Podziemski is a really big question mark defensively because in his time at WCC, in the WCC conference, Santa Clara ran a ton of zone, kind of maybe hiding him a little bit, and just kind of that was their defensive philosophy. We've seen that fail a lot of the time with Syracuse players coming to the NBA where they just don't know how to guard a guy one-on-one. That's a problem. But offensively, he fits really well because I think he's somebody who can really work out of the pick and roll actions that Sacramento likes to do, and specifically some of their dribble handoff stuff with Sabonis. We saw Kevin Huerter find so much success this year, specifically going to his right hand. Well, let's give him a left-handed option now that Sabonis can hand off the ball to, and he can roll down toward the left. And yeah, Sabonis maybe feel a little awkward at first playing with his, on the right side of the rim a little bit more frequently, but I do think it opens up Sacramento's offense and kind of gives them some symmetrical looks that they could play both of those guys at the same time and present teams with two shooters that you don't want to leave. Podziemski shot over 42% from three this year. Very, very prolific shooter, a very skilled shooter who I think is going to make a ton of shots during his NBA career. To me, he's a better Luke Kennard. I think that there's a little bit more aggression in his game. I think he's a little bit more vertically athletic than Luke Kennard. I think he's a little less physically limited than Luke Kennard. So for me, I like Brandon Podziemski a lot. I think Sacramento gets a good player here, although it doesn't address need as much. I just think overall, if you can find good players, you draft them, and Brandon Podziemski to me is going to be a good NBA player. Pick 25, the Memphis Grizzlies here now at this spot, and the Grizzlies, who are in kind of a pickle against the Lakers, they're just looking for talent here, and specifically guys who can help progress their half-court offense, because right now in the NBA playoffs, they're averaging 0.35 points per possession in direct isolation, which is dead last, and it's dead last by a mile in the postseason. Now, credit the Lakers for some of their defensive efforts there. To be honest, Dylan Brooks, I'm very interested to see what happens with him this free agency, because I think there's a pathway where Memphis does not keep him specifically with some of the things that have kind of played out this series and some of his inefficiencies over the last 4 or 5 years. Bryce Sensabaugh, I think, is going to be a very efficient NBA player who's going to step in right away. She's going to shoot above 45% from the field probably as a rookie, which is somewhat rare, specifically with the play style he has as a mid-range scorer. He works very, very well at a triple threat, very good jab step, and really creates a lot of space without having to dribble the ball very much, which I think fits in pretty well with what Memphis wants to do offensively. They don't want to have Bryce Sensabaugh become an isolation player, but I think he has a skill set where he would help improve some of their isolation offense. And just finding a bucket for Memphis in the half court's been a big struggle for them, despite having John Morant, who's an awesome half-court offensive player. I think that they still need a little bit more to help them there. Bryce Sensabaugh makes a lot of sense for me as a fit here for the Memphis Grizzlies. Pick 26, the Indiana Pacers here now. Remember, we went with Taylor Hendricks, pick number 7. And at 26, we're going to go get another wing, another forward specifically, in Leonard Miller, who flashed a lot of upside early in his draft process last year, where he considered declaring for the NBA draft, decided to withdraw his name, which I think was a very good decision for himself. And now at this point, I think it's a real legitimate prospect that could actually make some noise this year and move up some boards towards the draft, because he's in the past flashed a lot of playmaking, a little bit of ball handling, but this year he really bought into becoming a rebounder and somebody who's going to play around the rim and be a straight line driver. And I think that really simplified his game, helped limit some of those really negative moments that made you kind of chuckle and say, well, this guy's really not a legitimate draft prospect in my eyes, to the point where now I really believe he is. And I think he could specifically help Indiana keep some offensive possessions alive as an offensive rebounder. And for Indiana specifically, they're just looking for more length, size, athleticism, and then some upside. And I think that Miller here presents all of those things, plus a little bit more if the shot ever really, that's one of the big swing skills on him, is how does he shoot at the next level. I think if things go right, he could be a really nice pickup for Indiana. 27, we have the Charlotte Hornets here again. Remember, earlier on we went with Amen Thompson, and at this spot I'm going with Amari Bailey out of UCLA. And you might be saying, wow, interesting, another guard. I think a Terry Rozier trade could be in the works this offseason. I think that Charlotte right now, they have to look at their roster pretty much as a blank slate outside of LaMelo Ball and Mark Williams. We'll see what happens with Miles Bridges as well. I like some of Charlotte's young players, but there's not a lot of, wow, I know that this guy's either going to be there. PJ Washington's a restricted free agent, or I don't know how good these guys are really going to become. So for me, I just think you take good players, you take guys that you trust, and maybe you have your backcourt trio of the future with LaMelo, Amen Thompson, and Amari Bailey after this year's draft. And maybe that's where you want to build. I think Amari Bailey gives you things that both Amen Thompson and LaMelo Ball do not, in terms of defensive-minded guard who is willing to pick up 94 feet, kind of be a pest on that end of the floor, while also having the ability to drive the ball, but not really with the physical force of a Amen Thompson or the skying ability, but he's got very, very good touch, specifically with his left hand. He's a very left-handed player as of right now. Again, this is not about fit. If you're drafting for Charlotte, it's too early to think about fit here. You draft good players, you draft guys that you think are going to have nice careers, and I think Amari Bailey is going to stick around for quite a while. You just look at the backup point guards in this league, and I think Amari Bailey outclasses quite a few of them in a couple of seasons. Pick 28, Utah back on the board again. This is their third pick in the first round, which is why you can see they clearly are a team that would look to trade up if possible on draft night, just consolidate some of their picks and get a better player if they can. But if they do pick with this spot, Kobe Buffkin, a guy that I like, a lot of people are maybe even higher on Kobe Buffkin than myself. I don't think Kobe Buffkin's a bad player. I just think, how consistently is he going to appear in NBA games and how much of an impact is he going to have? We'll see. He's got a solid shooting stroke. Utah, again, just like Charlotte, not in a position where I'm worried about fit long term. I think you just draft players that you think could be good. I think Kobe Buffkin's going to have a first round grade on him by most NBA GMs and executives. 28 just felt right to me. Like I would love for there to be like some type of, this specific action that Will Hardy ran is going to be beautiful for Kobe Buffkin. I don't think that at 28 it needs to go down that far in terms of, this is my evaluation and why. I just think at this spot, they're looking for talent. Kobe Buffkin has a lot of talent, and he's somebody who I think can put the ball in the hole, can handle the rock for a team, can be a consistent bench scorer for them, specifically early on when they still have some of the pieces that they have, like Sexton Clarkson. You can still find a role for Buffkin to find success. Ochai Agbaji started to flash by the back end of the year as well. So we've already addressed some nice needs for them in terms of Whitmore and going with a few other players in this draft. So I think Buffkin for me just made sense as a safe landing spot at this spot. 29, back to the Indiana Pacers. This is also their third first round pick here in this year's draft. So maybe I should have mentioned the Pacers as a team looking to maybe move up during draft night as well. And I have been going with Bilal Coulibaly here. The reason why I like him to this team is he offers some of that length and defensive versatility that I think Indiana is going to crave on draft night, but he's also a little bit more skilled offensively in terms of the ability to put the ball on the deck, get to the rim. He uses his length very well as a finisher. That's one thing I really noticed about him with the film and I think that's something that they could still use. Mathurin, obviously a very athletic, creative, crafty finisher in the air, contorts his body very well. Coulibaly does a little bit less of that, but also just gets to the rim a little bit quicker with that length and typically finds a way to finish around the rim past contact, not through it, not around it, but just past it, because he gets to the rim quicker and finds a way to get the ball up to the rim. So Indiana with 3 firsts, again, I expect them to make some type of trade on draft night, either out of the first round to a later year with one of these picks, or potentially up in the draft using maybe say picks 26 and 29 to get into the teens. That could be a potential option as well. For Indiana, I don't really hate any of those options. I just think ultimately they need to be finding just good constant contributors with pretty solid length, size, and athleticism. And I think we really nailed all of those things in this year's draft for them if they were to keep all 3 picks. And then pick 30, the Los Angeles Clippers here now. This pick is a swap with the Houston Rockets via Milwaukee. This again comes from that Eric Gordon trade on the trade deadline live stream that we had. And I settled on Maxwell Lewis here for them. Of course, in that deal, they ended up moving off of a guy like Luke Kennard. And I have questions about the Clippers if they're going to ultimately at some point blow things up with Paul George and or Kawhi Leonard, maybe move one of them, move both of them. Right now they're down 3-1 in the series to Phoenix at the time I'm recording this. Of course, I've dated this video quite a bit while recording, but it's okay. You guys can see the date on the description anyway. So the Clippers, for me, I think are still a team that is relatively dangerous, but after moving Kennard, they generate a lot of 3-point looks with the way that they move the ball, the way that they play. They just sometimes don't cash them in. And moving Kennard, who constantly cash them in, like it made sense because defensively he's limited, and then also just the lack of aggression sometimes from him made kind of made you want to pull your hair out a little bit. But a guy who puts in nearly 50% of his three-pointers is hard to replace. Maxwell Lewis is not going to do that, but he's at least got the potential as a shooter to put the ball in the hoop a little bit more frequently. The Clippers always shoot very well from three just based on the looks they generate. I think Maxwell Lewis would shoot a very, very nice percentage early on in his career with the Clippers, who are constantly loaded with depth and talent. And honestly, I don't think that this team needs this pick either. They could probably trade out of it if they wanted to. I would recommend it for them if they can get some type of future pick from a team, albeit even lottery protected or something, just to open up their future pathways to making other trades and exploring ways to continue to improve their team. But the Clippers, they always do a good job of adding second rounders as well. So maybe Maxwell Lewis, if he's available 3 picks later, they could just buy back into the second round using cash or a variety of methods. We'll see what the NBA CBA kind of rule changes if that affects anything this draft. But the Clippers, they're in a spot where this pick, to be honest, Maxwell Lewis, solid fit. Just don't really know if he moves the needle too much for me in year one, which is fine. You're not really expecting a guy at pick 30 to do that. I'm not the biggest Maxwell Lewis fan either. I think he has some real defensive deficiencies, but the length, size, shot making is definitely something that is going to be intriguing for teams and also just viewers as well when they're watching his highlights specifically. Thank you guys all so much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content as well. It's a lot of fun recording this here after an NBA playoff game, and it's currently 1:45 in the morning, so I got to get some sleep, but I hope you guys did enjoy. Again, thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.